You know, since being introduced to YouTube sculpting last year, I have consumed my fair share of Zelda content, and I think it's safe to say that most of the attention is given over to the big boys. It's for this reason that I wanted to focus my attention on the humble and often overlooked Bokoblin, which I have seen appear on a few Talus models, but they're only in mini form. As a mere hobbyist, with this model I wanted to push myself to try and invoke movement, and to that end I'll be using the thickest gauge steel wire that I have for the legs and a lighter gauge for the arms and the upper body. This will act as an anchor point and that I can form fit into an MDF board. The foot will end at the green tape you can see here, and the remaining wire will be a rocky platform for our pigman to propel himself off. I'll then use my pasta maker to condition the clay, and with a standard pasta maker, make sure to use thin sheets of clay, otherwise you will crack the rollers and may be forced to return it to the local homeware store claiming that pasta dough broke it in order to get a free replacement. Not that I would ever do that. Anyway, with the body receiving the initial bulk, I can then begin to incorporate the relevant musculature, firstly starting with the chesticles, then onto the French baguettes that make up the back. I can then make one ball into two juicy hip boobies before trimming down the lower back and smoothing into the main body. From here I can channel my inner David Blaine to magic up a formidable booty for one to twerk the night away. I'll then add the forearms and give him shoulder pads Balthazar Brat would be envious of, and with a series of blades, metal tools and silicone shapers I can refine and smooth Wilbur further. I decided on Wilbur as his name after the lovable swine from Charlotte's Web. To add the definition to the legs, I can use a scraping tool to remove clay to give the impression of muscle belly insertions. And then I'll smooth the muscles to have a softer appearance, as I don't want or think a murderous pigman would be particularly shredded. And now, introducing the Black Falcon. If you don't have one of these tools, real game changer. Got it on Temu. Absolutely love it. Never go back. I'll take a few seconds to review the proportions before adding in some rib definition with the scraping tool, followed by a little edge smoothing. I'll then add in the hamstring sweep and a quick spin to the back, and he admittedly looks a bit like the Offspring. I'll then move down to the Tarantino play zone and lovingly caress the toes into submission. Position. I can then poke in a couple of divots for future toenails and get on to adding some scarred up texture to a leathery back. I'll use plastic wrapping to soften the impression left in the clay, and then ask for validation via internet meme.
Nice.
Thank you, Michael Rosen. Thank you. I can then begin working on the launching foot and use a blade to make the toes. I will transfer Wilbur from his MDF base to a cork base, as ovens do not like MDF.
Okay, it's on fire.
It's on fire.
And then we are on to the head. And hey, if you like what I do here, could you do me a solid and hit that like and subscribe button? Really appreciate it. 70% of my returning viewers are not yet subscribed.
You wanna know how I got these scars?
And the only way to fight the Nepo babies is together. So join me at AMBA, the Anti-Nepo Baby Association. After adding some pre-baked eyes, I'll scoop out the mouth with a variety of scraping tools, and then I will add in the gums and or lips to the mouth. And with the help of the count, I'll add 1, then 2 oinking holes to his sniffer, round off the edges with a ball stylus, and then get onto some angry brows and a couple of "I have 3 young children at home and haven't slept properly since 2019" bags under his eyes. I'll then use the Black Falcon to add in snout wrinkles and begin beefing up the eyebrows, as I don't like it how it is. I can then add in the glabellar lines, commonly known as frown lines. I can from here start laying on little wriggly worms wherever it tickles my bits and add in the lower gums. Now, unfortunately, when sizing the head, I made a ball of clay that fit the body proportionately. Sadly, being new to this sculpting malark, I didn't account for adding clay for all the facial features. This oversight has resulted in a slight case of gigantism, which means I have to start again. With this head being a little bit smaller, I'll add in a metal wire to the lower jaw. So now I'm going to need to perform a jawectomy.
Jawectomy. Noun, a sometimes necessary surgery to remove one's lower jaw for the love of the game or battling. James Bond in 1979.
You see, faceless viewer? Definitely a legitimate procedure. Isn't that right, Trapjaw?
Yes, my jawectomy has given me the confidence I needed to get out into the world and try to take it over for my boss.
To attach the head to the body, I'll round a piece of wire around a large ball stylus and insert said wire into the back of the head, and I can close at the seam. Texture the head and get on to adding some teeth, which I definitely recorded some of it. I use the two-prong approach to impede any unwanted cranial rotation, but I'm going to need some clay to fill in the neck space. Luckily, I have an extra pig head that I no longer need. I'll fill in the neck and go through the motions of blending into the head and body, adding creases, smoothing creases, and scraping in skin texture. For the ears, I'll drill in a couple of mounting holes for Armature. I can then add the bulk of the ears and the cartilagey bits, and with a little bacon bond application I can add the front of the ear to cover the supporting wire. I'll blend in the front to the back and use a medley of ball styluses to texture the ear up a wee bit. I could have called it good here, but I saw from a distance that the neck was just too long. So it's time to embrace my inner 18th century French revolutionary and take this guy's head.
Bring me his head!
With the head successfully departed from the body, I can trim the mounting wires and reattach with a shortened neck. I can give the body one final rub down with isopropyl alcohol and back into the oven with Wilbur before I get onto a barrage of weaponry and accessories. Artist has taken extreme liberties with what you are about to witness. None of the following will be in-game accurate. He cares not for lore, nor your feelings. He cares but for one thing: the rule of cool. I'll begin with the spear heads, which will be an amalgamation of a spiked bugger spear and a dragon bone spear. I can then move my attention over to the shaft, which is a small wooden dowel that receives a coat of bacon bond before I can apply the clay. I'll shape the shaft to have a cartoony look with a narrow end and an exaggerated head. I can cap off the spear and carve in the detail with the rings of the tree trunk. Finally, I'll add some texture with a pointy tool and some plastic wrap before moving on to the dragon bone shield. I'll begin with a little disc that I can remove sections of until I achieve the correct shape. I'll then score in the location of the individual boards of the wooden grain texture. I can then score in the boards a little deeper, then removing all my grubby fingerprints and bang them in the oven to bake. While they're cooking, I'll make the fabric wrist straps, texturing with the sculpting tool, then apply the wrist with bacon bond or bacon bond. With the straps on, I can get started on the tiara, and I thought the little snow cone underwhelming and the jewel tiara looked like a lot of work, so I opted for the Goldilocks approach. I went with a single oversized pointy one. I'll score in the ridge locations and then pinch in the pointy bits before refining the ridges to look like they overlap. I textured the horn with a stylus and then I baked. Finally, I made a tiny skull pendant,
What have I got?
Wilbur's tongue, and the loincloth, which I texture with a rough sponge. To make the hands, I can make a sphere that I can split approximately in two so that each hand is the same size. I'll slice on the fingers, then use my fingers to shape Wilbur's fingers, which I'll test fit around the shaft of the spear. Refine the shape, then make the accompanying appendage. The left hand I can wrap around a small wooden dowel, which will be the future shield handle. I can then locate the hands on the arms and blend into the main body, then drill into the top of the skull to locate the tiara and pray to the gods of Hyrule that Toy Story rules do not apply to clay. I'll make and bake a few gnarled fingernails and push them into the still soft clay. I'll texture the hands to match the rest of the body and then cut a small wedge of a sanding block to position the spear and add a proxy shield handle for the bake. With my clay extruder, I'll extrude some clay to become earrings and then it's on to some battle damage. And say it with me, dollar, store, blade. Here we can see a manifest of all the accessories I hadn't accounted for when my little pea brain said, hey, make a bokoblin. That'll be quick and easy, right? But, you know, at least now we can paint. I'll begin with a bone white base coat to the spearheads, the shield, then the arm straps, though I'll change this later to
Lore accurate orange.
I'll then add the nail polish and the tiara before painting the skin. Here I've used Citadel's Pterodon Turquoise contrast paint, which worked as well as it didn't. That is to say that it pooled in certain areas with a very blotchy finish and went on perfectly in others. I'll then apply a woody brown to the spear, the shield and the loincloth before adding the bubblegum pink to the nose and the mouth. I'll fill in the ears with a folk art daybreak yellow and add a lighter aqua to the lips. Next up are the bone washes. I'll wash in the darker browns, wait for that to dry, and come back over the raised areas with a sponge to lighten these regions. I can attempt some edge highlighting on the horn, which came out adequate. As previously alluded to, I repainted the straps orange and with a light aqua I sponged the raised areas of the skin to fake natural lighting. I'll add a dirty wash to the straps, dab away the excess with a paper towel, and dry brush to finish. The earrings receive a few coats of gold, and then we can get on to something new. This is glow in the dark paint by Folk Art, and I'm going to use it on the eyes and the tongue of our dear friend Wilbur. This took more coats than I care to count, and each coat takes an hour to dry. Needless to say, I shall not be rushing back to make things glow in the dark. I'll give the teeth a bone white and then a dirty wash and wipe away the paint at the point of the tooth for a nice gradient. I picked up this little trick from Boylai Hobby Time in his latest Death Star video where he made a starry sky using wire and paint. Now it's assembly time, and while I do this, on the last video I asked for Halloween ideas and that I would make the most upvoted comment in my next video. And the winner, with a whopping 1, 2, 3 votes, is @secretmoon_woos with a skull dog. Now I had to be educated on what a skull dog actually is, so here's a verbal preview of my plan. I recently finished Brandon Sanderson's Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, which is now in my top 3 books of all time. And there was a character, an antagonist, a nightmare, if you will, that took on a lupine form, and it was made of shadows, with deep hollow eye sockets and piercing solid white eyes. So I thought I could do that, but you know, with a skull. I'll glue the tongue in place, then the shin guards, the shield, the pendant, and the loincloth. To convey movement, I held up the waist tie and used superglue to lock the billowing straps in place. The final piece is to position the ever-important murder staff, and then, as is par for the course, we can gloss up the mouth with a varnish and glow up the eyes with little white boops. To finish up the paint job, I'll haphazardly stipple on some war paint. I'm not going to worry about keeping this tidy or even, as it's fantasy war paint that probably wouldn't be too tidy anyway. I can then add some UV resin to the eyes to finish the model, and it's on to the base. As this model already has a variety of glues, paints and other melty and flammable materials, I'll be opting for air drying clay for the base. I'll build up the ridge Wilbur will be using as his launching platform and texture the larger clay areas with a large piece of broken concrete I took from some active roadworks. To reach the hard to reach spaces, I'll use a piece of garden mulch on its tweezers, and then I can trim down the edges with the blade, and nothing could possibly go wrong from here. Right? Wrong. You see, this air drying clay shrinks dramatically whilst driving, leaving me these nasty looking edges that simply won't do. Luckily, I've got this multi-purpose hole filler that I can use to fill in the areas of unwanted shrinkage. For painting the terrain, I tried a technique I saw on the Terrain Tutor's YouTube channel, which could have worked well, but using very watery washes seemed to soften the air drying clay, turning the top crust back into a paste of sorts. You can see I use a variety of colours whilst wet, so they may bleed naturally into each other. With the base layer down, I'll go over the entire base with a mid-grey wash, dabbing with a sponge as I go. When this dried, I hated the dirty, dusty finish, but held on to hope that dry brushing and flocking might save the day. And dry brushing is as reliable as a hot dog and a beer, and today it did not let me down, especially on the hole filler sections, which dried a lot firmer and sharper than the clay. For the flocking, I have a variety of woodland scenic gravels and sands, and you can see here the post-dry brushing terrain doesn't actually look too bad. Regardless, for better or worse, I'm about to cover 90% of it in some pretty vile adhesive and then a ton of sand and gravel. From here I can tip off the excess and save that for later before adding in some long beach grasses. I've added a few twigs from the garden that I baked in the oven to sterilise, and I can give the feet a light dusting with some fine powder, not a pigment. And then I can lock it onto place with a spritzing of some woodland scenic cement. And for the finishing touches, I'll paint the sides black and decide to add some pebbles that I borrowed from a garden plant. I know it's been a long one, but thank you so much if you stuck around this far. There was a lot more to cover than I bargained for, but that said, it is by far my favourite sculpt to date. Had a lot of fun with this one, and I think he's pretty freaking cool. But we are all wrapped up on this one, and we can finally check out some final images. A big thank you to those that are back and to those that are new here. As always, if you like what I do here, please like. If you want to share what I do here, please share and subscribe, as our YouTube algorithmic overlords love that stuff. And any engagement is good engagement. Remember, as always, share it with your friends, share it with your enemies, and until next time, go make a mess.